Imagine you're in the following really cool situation. You are helping a client buy a new build. This is a move up, it's an expensive home, it's new, you're excited, you're gonna earn a big bucks on half a commission helping that buyer buy the new build. One of the reasons you're excited is because while the buyer needs to sell their old home in order to buy the new build, the old home is under contract, and that buyer of the old home looks really solid. And it takes a while to build a new house, and the new house contract has been under contract for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, but it's marching towards closing. Everything looks solid until it doesn't. And what goes wrong? What goes wrong is on the old home, the seller of the old home, your client who's also buying the new home, the buyer of the old home has a hiccup in the loan process. They can't sell the house that they need to sell, or somebody gets laid off, or interest rates have gone up too high for that buyer of the old home to be able to qualify. And all of a sudden, the old home falls out of contract. And this is, of course, bad for your seller, because your seller might be in jeopardy of being able to close on the purchase of the new build, number one. Number two, they may have a lot of earnest money that's gone hard on the new build transaction. So, it's also bad for you because you don't have the opportunity to earn, potentially 2 or 3 sides, one side, co-op commission on the purchase of the new build, and perhaps 2 sides on the sale of the old home. So what do? Well, ideally you'd put the old home back on the market and find a new buyer at the same price and do it fast, and everything would happen smoothly to allow your client to be able to close on the purchase of the new build. But the universe doesn't always unfold the way you want it to. And one way or another, you might start the process of considering buying your client's old home at the right price, of course, buying your client's old home to facilitate your client's purchase of the new build. That kind of scenario that I just described has gotten more and more common, in the 2022 era. As the market has slowed down, more of those old home sales have started to crater, and brokers are in the position of contemplating purchasing the property that their client has listed. And that has created an increased interest in a form that the Division of Real Estate has called the licensee buyout addendum. And let's talk about how to use it properly. The first concept, and really the only concept in this video, the most important concept is you use the licensee buyout addendum when you really do not want to buy the property. If you want to buy the property, you do something else. I'll explain that later in this video. But if you really don't want to buy the property, you're still going to market the property. You're gonna hope and pray that another buyer comes in, a market buyer, so that you don't have to close on the purchase of the old property. Sure, you've negotiated a decent price, but you just don't want to get that. You don't want to get that strung out. You don't want to make that big draw on your line of credit. You use the licensee buyout addendum. The licensee buyout addendum is for situations where you do not want to buy the property. You are merely doing it as an accommodation of your client to benefit yourself, like getting a co-op commission on the sale of the replacement property, perhaps as an inducement to get the listing in the first place. And one of the ways that you can see that you use the licensee buyout addendum for that transaction is the licensee buyout addendum in section 4 of the licensee buyout addendum has a provision in it that says the seller, upon written notice to the buyer, that's you, the buyer, can terminate the contract at any time they want. And you will sing hallelujah when your client, who's the seller of their old home, wants to terminate, because you won't have to buy it. That's what you use the licensee buyout addendum for. Now, what about the other situation? The other situation is the situation when you have your client's property listed and the market beats up the seller some, helps the seller understand that they need to lower the price, and the seller has dropped the price twice, and is contemplating a third price drop, and wow, at that price, you might want to buy that property. That's a completely different scenario. That's a situation where you want to buy the property, and all of a sudden, your role as a buyer, a potential buyer, who has an interest in buying the property as inexpensively as possible, conflicts with your role as a broker for the seller, who has the seller has an interest in selling the property for as much as possible. So that's a conflict of interest. And how do you manage that conflict of interest? The Division of Real Estate has a position that addresses this, and what the position says is in those situations, that is not a conflict of interest that your client can waive without a few things happening. Number one, the listing agreement needs to be terminated, and that's unconditionally terminated, not terminated if you close on the purchase, not terminated only if the seller follows through. It's terminated. Number two, you need to relinquish your right to a commission in that transaction. Now, that doesn't mean you can't benefit from the fact that you're the buyer. The commission could be backed out of the purchase price, and you just got to be transparent with your client. Hey, if I bought it for X and I got a commission, I would net this, so I'm putting it under contract for this amount. And then the third thing you need to do is you need to have a conspicuous trail of advising your client who's selling the house that they're trying to get rid of to consult a lawyer, consult an appraiser. And because these conflicts of interest are so fraught, I would suggest to you, this is not required by the Division of Real Estate, but it is in your best interest, it is so much in your best interest to see that your client does consult a lawyer or an appraiser, that you're willing to pay, say, the first hour of consultation with that attorney who is advising your seller client, who's advising your seller client. Don't send them to me because you want to buy the property. You don't want to have your seller's transactions blessed by the lawyer who you have in your back pocket. That seller needs to find their own lawyer. All right, that's how you handle situations when you're buying the property. Remember, there's two situations. One where you really don't want to close. For those, you use what form? Yes, that's right, the licensee buyout addendum. The other times, if you really want to close, you do not use the licensee buyout addendum, and you follow the protocols that I've identified in this webcast. Ladies and gentlemen, you remember the line, we live in a complicated world. Be careful out there.